Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our conversation with ESGR. Today, you will hear from Jim Munganast and Steve Martin about how their organization can support local employers who employ or want to employ members of the military. Now, let me introduce our speakers. Jim is the Tennessee State Chair for the Committee for Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve and Vice Chair of Operations for the National ESGR Board of Directors. Jim retired as a brigadier general in the U.S. Air Force Reserve and as a senior attorney for the Tennessee Valley Authority, specializing in employment and labor law. Steve Martin is the Knoxville area ESGR chair, retired from WATE TV as chief engineer after 36 years and is a computer hobbyist, ham radio operator, and private pilot. Jim and Steve, take it away.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity that the Knox Chamber has given us to talk a little bit about ESGR and the USERRA law, which governs employment rights. So we're going to work through a slide deck to talk a little bit about ESGR, and I think you should have those up at this point. The agenda, what we're going to try to talk about is the importance of the reserve components, and I'll get into that a little bit because I think it's good to understand how reliant our military is on employers these days to help support our military efforts. We'll talk a bit about what ESGR is, and especially about our employer outreach mission, which is obviously, as the name says, a way for us to educate and advocate for ESGR with employers in the area. We'll then talk about what they call USERRA, the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. That's a law that governs employers who employ Guard and Reserve folks. Then we'll talk a little bit about the law's provisions about the rights and responsibilities of both employees and the military. And then a little bit about if there are issues or concerns, how those things get addressed. The key point I want to make, as this slide says, employers are essential for our national security because at this point, and you probably know this since 9/11, there have been 1 million Guard and Reserve folks that have been activated for service for extended deployments. And we can't sustain our national security now without the support of you, the employers. And so we thank you at the front end for that. It makes a big difference in what we can accomplish at a much lower cost than if all the reservists were on active duty and drawing full pay all of the time. So this next slide, we're actually going to show a video that was produced by our ESGR public affairs folks. And Emily, if you would take it away.
Today, our nation's all-volunteer military is 2.1 million strong. These extraordinary men and women serve both overseas in the defense of our nation and in our local community when called upon. A critical part of today's military is the National Guard and the Reserve, which make up 40% of the joint force. Because members of the Guard and Reserve serve in both the military and civilian workforce, they need the support of their employers when they deploy for weeks or months at a time, often on short notice. At the same time, these patriotic employers face their own challenges as they support the needs of the nation. Enter ESGR, Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve. Established in 1972, the main role of ESGR is to help employers understand, value, and support their employees' military service.
We work in every way we can creatively and proactively to reach out to our nation's employers.
From seminars to educational experiences like Boss Lifts, ESGR consistently helps employers understand what it's like to serve in the military.
So it's a learning opportunity for them, and that's what we hope to accomplish through all the things that we do.
In this way, ESGR exposes employers to the unique experience and capabilities that Guard and Reserve members bring to the workplace.
Hiring people who serve in the Guard and Reserve is not just the right thing to do, it is also the business smart thing to do. When you know that they are dependable, they are team leaders, they are mission focused, that's a good hire as far as I'm concerned, and I don't care what business you're in.
Veterans have a proven track record of success. So whether you're talking about a military spouse or you're talking about someone in the Guard or Reserve, companies recognize that veterans are a great hire.
While ESGR is a voice for the members of the Guard and Reserve, it also very much works for the nation's patriotic employers.
And we're the voice for employers within the Department of Defense. So we advocate in both ways. We help to strike a healthy balance there where we're a benefit to both.
A key benefit of ESGR is that it offers free services, helping employees and employers understand USERRA, the federal employment protection law for service members, and mediating USERRA cases are both very important parts of ESGR's mission.
ESGR is important because they serve as that interface to help us to make sure that we're fulfilling our obligation. It's been a great partnership for us.
ESGR also provides a suite of recognition opportunities, including the Patriot Award, the 7 SEALs Award, and the prestigious Secretary of Defense Employer Support Freedom Award.
We think it's important to tell the nation the great things that American employers are doing. We're really blessed in this country to have that kind of support coming from the nation's great employers.
This employer-employee relationship is so important that in celebration of ESGR Week, a presidential proclamation stated, "Because of the vital importance of our National Guard and Reserve forces to our national security, those who employ them are key partners in the defense of our nation." While ESGR provides education and mediation, what makes ESGR unique is that it is made up of over 3,000 unpaid volunteers.
We're volunteers. We are not paid a single dime to go out and do what we do. And to my ESGR volunteers, it is an honor and a privilege for me to have the opportunity to serve with you.
If you are a member of the Guard or Reserve, or if you are a company or organization of any size that has employees that are a member of the Guard or Reserve, ESGR is ready to serve you. And if you want to stand for those that stand for us, join our volunteers that make a real difference each day. Visit esgr.mil to learn more, because we all serve.
So, as that little video said, about 40% of our military is in the Army and the Air National Guard, the Reserve Forces in the Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force, and Coast Guard. And while they comprise about 40% of the total force, to maintain that force, that 40%, it only requires 16% of our defense budget. So you can imagine what the cost would be if all of the reserve component people were on active duty all of the time. It would be at a tremendous cost that I don't think our nation could do at this point. One thing too, to mention that the mission of the Guard has changed a lot since when I joined active duty and then went into the reserve in 1975. Our reserve component, RC stands for reserve component, has changed from a strategic reserve, which would be for a total world war, something like that, to an operational reserve, where anytime there is a significant operation in the military, we call on our Guard and Reserve to come support that mission. And in fact, over 1 million Guard and Reserve folks have been activated since 9/11. And back in right after the Vietnam War, General Creighton Abrams, who was a significant Army general at that time, determined that the military composition ought to be such that the Guard and Reserve was relied on much more heavily than it had been in the past. And as a result of that, major portions of our military capability is, now in the reserves. For instance, 28 brigade combat teams, about half of our capability is in the Guard and Reserve, and the 278th Armored Cavalry Regiment, headquartered right here off Sutherland Drive, is one of those brigade combat teams. And logistics, over 75% of our logistics capability is now in the Guard and the Reserve. Next slide kind of depicts the status of the Guard and Reserve in Tennessee and the Knoxville area. We have about 18,000 Guard and Reserve members in the state of Tennessee In our area in Knoxville, the Army National Guard has a 278th, which I just spoke about, and the 1st of the 230th Aviation Regiment, which is out at Joint Base McGee-Tyson, and the 254th Military Police Company out of Lenoir City. The Air National Guard, again, out at McGee-Tyson, has an air refueling wing, a cyber operations squadron, and Air National Guard Training and Education Center that helps educate enlisted airmen from all over the country, in fact, active Guard and Reserve. In the Army Reserve, there's a 489th Civil Affairs Battalion, and I might add that as 9/11 kicked off and we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, the civil affairs battalions and units across the country were almost totally activated because there's really not much capability in the active Army for civil affairs. Marine Corps Reserve, we have a 4th Engineering Battalion, Company D, and the Navy Reserve off of Alcoa Drive has what's called the Naval Reserve Center, which has a number of various units or subordinate parts of units at those facilities. So we have quite a presence here in the Knoxville area of Guard and Reserve. At this point, I want to turn it over to our area chair, Steve Martin, to talk a little bit about what ESGR is. And so, Steve, it's yours.
Thank you, Jim. ESGR was formed in 1972 as the government's involvement in the Vietnam War was winding down, and they did away with the draft. At that point, the military became 100% volunteer. And a problem with the volunteer army is that they have a civilian life that they have to balance with that. So ESGR was formed to encourage employers to recognize how important it was to support their employees who are serving in uniform. We have 3,200 volunteers all across the country. We have 16 here locally from all walks of life. Some are ex-military, some have never served in uniform, but they're all welcome to come and help support our purpose. Next slide, Jim. Jim, there we go. ESGR's mission is threefold. Our mission is one of education, and one of mediation, and one of recognition. Education, we reach out to employers and the serving military and educate them on their responsibilities under federal law to each other. It's a two-sided coin. They each have duties and responsibilities toward the other. In cases where the interaction between employer and employee reaches a point where it's a problem, ESGR is available to step in as a mediator, to sit down with both sides, go over what their duties and responsibilities are towards the other, and hopefully come to an amicable solution that recognizes both sides' rights. And the third is recognition. Whenever an employer goes way above the support that they're required to give under federal law, we like to recognize and encourage that. So ESGR has a program of recognition by presentation of various levels of awards, which we'll talk about in just a bit. Okay, Jim, next slide. Thank you, sir. The education aspect of ESGR's mission takes several parts. We travel to professional conferences, such as the Society of Human Resources Association. We travel to local conferences like the Tennessee Sheriff's Association Conference, and we present the ESGR's mission to these folks and let them know what we're all about, let them know what we do to try to support the Guard and Reserve and to encourage employers to do the same. Also, we encourage employers to demonstrate their support by signing what's called an ESGR Statement of Support. It's a very nice wall-mounted certificate that they can sign and show the world that, yes, we walk the walk. We don't just talk the talk. And another aspect of our education, which you'll see an example of here in just a bit, is what we call a boss lift. And that is where we invite employers who are employing their the guardsmen and reservists to come along on an actual training mission and see just what these guys do and how important their work is. I think we have an example of that on the next slide, Jim, if you would please. This is from a recent boss lift with the 134th Air Refueling Wing out at McGee-Tyson Air Base. The folks you see in the picture there were able to board the plane and go along on a training mission and watch as the 134th folks actually did mid-air refueling. The aircraft you see there in the picture is an A-10 fighter aircraft. Okay, Jim, would you go to the next one, please? Employer awards are part of our mission too. We like to recognize when an employer provides exceptional support for their employees. The Patriot Award is the first of the hierarchy of awards. All of these awards are awards that are presented when a serviceman goes online and nominates their employer as having given them outstanding support in their Guard or Reserve activities. The Patriot Award is presented to the employee's supervisor. It's presented to an individual and recognizes that they have gone and given a lot of good support to that serving guardsman or reservist. The Above and Beyond Award is an award that's given at the local level, and it's an inclusive award that is it's a very broad award that I hope somebody can edit this. I'm going to try that one again. The Above and Beyond Award is given at the local level for employers who have gone above and beyond, obviously, the legal requirements of the USERRA law. The next award in the hierarchy is the Freedom Award. This is the most prestigious award that we give, and it is given to 15 companies over the U.S. in the space of a year in 3 different categories: small business companies, large business companies, and public companies. The way that works is the servicemen will get online and nominate their company for the Freedom Award. The nominations go to the state committees, the state ESGR committees, and they will elect 15 nominees to be passed on up to the Secretary of Defense. And the Secretary of Defense will approve it and award the awards to the nominated companies. It's a big deal. It's a great recognition of the service that the employer does to the employee. Okay, Jim, can we go on to the next one? In addition to the awards we just talked about, there's a Pro Patria Award. The Pro Patria Award is presented every year to one small business, one large business, and one public sector business in the state, and it's the highest award that can be awarded by the ESGR State Committee. One other award that's worthy of note is the Extraordinary Employer Support Award, and it's given to an enterprise that's won the Pro Patria Award or the Freedom Award after they have, over a period of 3 years, demonstrated continuing support for their serving guardsmen and reservist employees. Okay, Jim, next slide, please. Here's an example of a signing of a statement of support. News anchor Bo Williams at WATE signed a statement of support on behalf of WATE at a recent function there at Greystone, the home of WATE. Jim, next slide. This is an example of a presentation of a Patriot Award. The gentleman you see there in the orange shirt was the recipient of the award, and this award was presented at halftime at a recent University of Tennessee basketball game in front of all of the attendees. Okay, Jim, next one. This is another example of a Patriot Award. This presented to Capstone Concepts, who manages some restaurants here in the local area. The presenter, Marcus Witt, stands to your left, and the nominator stands to the right. She's an employee there at Capstone. Okay, Jim, the next one. This is the presentation of the Freedom Award to Cracker Barrel Old Country Store, who's headquartered in Lebanon, Tennessee. And Jim, the next one. Of course, this one happened last year. This is Governor Bill Lee presenting the Freedom Award on behalf of the Department of Defense to Oak Ridge National Labs. And at this point, to talk about the Uniform Service Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you. One thing I might note of in the state of Tennessee, we've had 14 Freedom Award recipients in the 26 years that award has been around. So with only 15 a year, we've done quite well in the state. There are 3 in the local area that have received the Freedom Award. Steve mentioned UT Battelle, which manages Oak Ridge National Labs. But in 2012, Tennessee Valley Authority received this award. And in 2013, a small company called Steel Plate Fabricators also won the award. And I believe all of these award recipients are investors in the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce. So we're kind of proud of that. Well, now turning to the USERRA, or Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. This is the law that had its roots back in the 40s, but got enacted as USERRA in 1994, building on the earlier laws. This is the one that governs the relationship between Guard and Reserve folks and their employers. It covers virtually every private and public employer, regardless of size. It doesn't apply if you're an individual independent contractor or a non-recurrent employee. That's one that's maybe a day laborer, et cetera. But for your regular employees, it covers all of them. And it also applies to both voluntary as well as involuntary uniform service, whether it's a wartime or peacetime. And the 3 basic things to remember about this law: it protects from discrimination. For example, deciding you're not going to hire a Guard or Reserve person because of their service in the Guard and Reserve. It provides protection for your job if you go on uniform military duty, to have your job when you get back. And it, of course, protects against retaliation. And a typical example of that, in fact, all of these, a lot of the provisions of USERRA track a lot of the anti-discrimination laws that your HR people already enforce and ensure are part of the policies of the company. And for example, with retaliation, if there were a hearing or something that occurred with respect to a USERRA law, and the company retaliated against the employee for testifying, whether that person's a Guard person or someone else in the company, that's what they were meaning by, I think, protection from retaliation. By the way, you'll notice on each of the slides, I'll have a citation to the Federal United States Code and also the Federal Regulations 20 CFR Part 1002. Those are the provisions of law and regulations that your HR people need to learn about to ensure that the USERRA law is appropriately enforced in the company. I'm going to mention one other thing that occurred a couple years ago in the federal USERRA law. For those of you that are familiar with the Army and Air National Guard here in the state of Tennessee, or any state, they really have a dual purpose. They serve, of course, as part of our federal United States military and can be called to service by the president or other officials within the Department of Defense to be activated or put on orders. But in addition to that, as you probably know from a number of things that have occurred in the state, whether it be COVID or whether it be hurricane relief or tornado relief, or the fires in Gatlinburg a couple of years ago, the governor has the authority to call up the National Guard for state purposes, what they call state active duty. And until this law that I'm talking about right now got passed 2 years ago, the only protections a National Guard person would have if they were called on state active duty would be in any state law that the the state might have enacted at some point. But effective in January of 2021, if a National Guardsman, that is Air National Guard or Army Guard, this doesn't apply to the reserves, of course, if they are serving on state-funded orders, under order of the governor, they will have the same USERRA protections if one of the three things listed below happens. If the service goes for 14 days or more, or if the service that they were called to do is in support of a national emergency, or it's in support of a major disaster declared by the president. So something new in the law that provides USERRA-like protections under the federal law for individuals on these types of state active duty. So getting back to USERRA and some of the provisions about USERRA, you see this slide talks about both employee and employer responsibilities. So I'll start on the left. When an employee is going to be on military duty, whether it be a weekend drill or a 2-week annual tour or an activation for a year or deployment overseas, they are to provide the employer prior notice. It does not have to be written. It can be verbal, but our recommendation is that they make sure that if it's a significant period of time, that they give some sort of written notice, an email or something else, to let the employer know when they're going for and when they expect to be back. The notice is to be prior to them leaving. So, there's no time limit on when they have to give it other than being prior to when they leave. But our recommendation is that the soldier or sailor, airman, etc., tell their employer as soon as they reasonably know that this is going to occur. And in fact, if it's like their weekend drills that they get a schedule at the first part of the year, they may want to just give a copy of that drill schedule to their supervisor so they know when they'll be gone for their weekend drills. The employee, to have the protections of USERRA, cannot serve for more than 5 cumulative years away from the workplace from any particular employer. We'll get into that a little bit more because there are some exceptions to that, in fact, some significant exceptions. The other thing is when they return from military duty, their service had to be under honorable conditions. If they are discharged under a general discharge that it does not include honorable conditions or a dishonorable discharge, they would forfeit their rights under the USERRA law for reinstatement. And finally, they have to return to work in accordance with USERRA guidelines. There's certain time periods that they have to come back to their employer to maintain their reemployment rights. The employer responsibilities include allowing an excused leave of absence for that soldier when they are gone. But in addition to that, it is the soldier's right to use their annual leave or personal time off, personal days, etc. If they want to while they're gone. They do not have to do that. They are allowed an excused leave of absence without pay, and it's their option whether they would like to use any military leave or other leave the employer might give, personal days off, etc. When the employee returns, the employer has to provide a prompt reinstatement of that employee. We'll get into that a bit. We'll also get into the seniority that needs to be restored, employment benefits and how that gets reinstated, any training that a person might need, and of course, obviously, no discrimination or retaliation for their being gone. So we'll get into a lot of these, a lot more in the next slides. The non-discrimination provision applies whether someone is initially seeking employment with the company and happen to mention that they are in the Guard and Reserve. You can't say, well, I'd rather not take you because you're going to be gone too much. Non-discrimination in reemployment, retention in employment, promotion, or any benefit of employment if the decision not to provide these sorts of benefits is on the basis of their being a member of the Guard, applying for membership in the Guard, serving in the Guard, etc. So we talked about someone who is in your employ and they head off for military duty. It may be a short weekend, it may be a 2-week period, or it may be an extended activation or deployment. So the employee has to return back to work in a timely basis, and this chart tells what that means. If you're gone from between 1 and 30 days, your obligation as a service member and an employee is to report back to work on the next scheduled workday after you've had 8 hours of rest, after you've gotten your travel back home from wherever you did the drill or the military duty. So that's basically immediately they have to come back with that caveat of it, giving them a little time to rest. If it's 31 to 180 days, the service member needs to apply for reinstatement within 14 calendar days following the completion of their military service. And if it's over 181 days, they have to apply for reinstatement within 90 days following completion of service. I might add one comment here, because it's happened a few times, is an employer might see this soldier back in town and has not heard from them yet. And they call us and say, what gives? The person must be back off active duty. Well, when people are in the military for extended periods of time, they are entitled to leave from the military while they're in their service of the country. So if you're gone for a year, you may get back from your deployment at 11 months, have a few things to do back at the armory, but the rest of that time until the year's up, you may be on leave with the military. They can come back, but they are under no obligation to come back to work. And this clock doesn't start till actually their orders end. So just wanted to let you know, sometimes you see that they're back and they may still be on orders at the time you see them. Okay, a few things that an employer can do when a person comes back after more than 30 days. You can request documentation to show that they actually performed uniform service, that you know when they ended their military service, so you can figure out whether their application for reemployment is timely, was within the time limits we just talked about. And also you can request documentation to show that the 5-year limitation has not been exceeded, and they didn't receive like a dishonorable discharge. Okay, so those are things that you as an employer can request to make sure that everything is legitimate. 99.9% of the time, all of these things are met, but obviously you have the right to have the documentation to show that's right. Okay, we talked about the 5-year limit that applies. That applies for each employer. If you change companies and go to a new employer, that 5-year clock starts over with that new employer. And even with the 5-year limit, there are certain periods of military duty that do not count against the 5 years. That includes what we used to call the annual tour or annual training, 2-week or whatever, usually 2-week period that they go on annually for their military training. It doesn't include the weekend drills and any professional development courses that they're required to take in the military. It also does not include involuntary service. So if you are activated for a year to go over and serve, for example, many served in Afghanistan and Iraq or Horn of Africa, those deployment times do not count. And if it is in support of an operation, like the ones I just mentioned were like Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, those sorts of things, you may decide to volunteer. And if you volunteer for those operational missions, that time does not count as well, even though you were a volunteer. And I think part of the thought on that is anytime you can get a volunteer to serve for that period, it means one less person is going to be called to involuntary service. So they certainly didn't want to discourage people who may in their life or with their family situation feel they can get away for that year to preclude them from doing that. It also, the exemption doesn't count for your initial active service obligation. When you join the military, you very often have a period of time you have to go off to a base and get your initial basic training and that sort of thing. So those are some of the things that go into this 5-year accumulation limit. In my career, I have not seen very many people that bump up against a 5-year limit, but it is certainly something that could happen, and the soldier needs to work with you to determine that. Okay, employee entitlements. Under the law, of course, we mentioned they need to have prompt reinstatement back to their job. And when they get reinstated, we're going to talk about something called the escalator position, which means that, you know, when they left, if they're gone, for example, for a year, things may have changed in the workplace that makes a position they should get different than it was before. They also are entitled to some accumulation of seniority as if they never left, immediate reinstatement of their health insurance, training or retraining if needed, and of course, obviously, protection against discharge. So we'll go into these things in a little bit more detail now. So this slide describes what your obligation is to re-employ a person, what position they should get when they get back from military duty. If that military duty was 90 days or less, they are entitled to return to the position in which they were employed or would have been employed, meaning there may have been a change during that time in your employment for that job category, or would have been employed if their employment had never been interrupted. So they get right back where they were at that point. If they are gone for more than 90 days, you as an employer have a little bit more flexibility. You either return them to the position in which they were employed or would have been employed, or to a position of, quote, like seniority, status, and pay, as long as the duties for which the person would be in that other position, they're qualified to perform after you qualify them, making reasonable efforts to do so. And if they couldn't be qualified for the above position, then you would place in a position that most closely approximates the above positions that the employee is qualified to perform. And of course, they maintain full seniority. It's we have a concept called the escalator clause. And that basically is, you know, with an escalator, it can go up or down. So for example, if during the time that they are gone, everyone in the work unit received a pay increase, then they would, upon their return, get that increased level of pay. If there was actually a layoff for all the people in their work group, their job category, and they would have been affected, then they would actually be reemployed, but in a laid off status. So that's what the escalator provision is all about. You have to look at where they would have been had they not left and figure out where they'd be on that escalator. There are special provisions if someone has incurred or aggravated a disability while they were on military duty. And the provisions here for HR people, they're probably already familiar with this because it's like the same sort of reasonable accommodation provisions you'll find in a number of the equal employment laws dealing with individuals with disabilities. The obligation for the employer is to make reasonable efforts to accommodate the disability so the employee can perform the job they would have had but for their military service, as we talked about earlier, the escalator provision. But if after reasonable efforts are made, the person cannot be qualified for that job, they must be placed in the following priority order: a job equivalent with equal seniority, status, and pay that the employee is qualified to perform, or a position, if you can't do that, a position that is the closest approximation to the position that you can give them with reasonable accommodation. And again, that gets back to a lot of accommodation laws that HR people are already used to. For pension and retirement, now, of course, some companies still have pensions, and you know, they will get credit for that service time that they're gone. Other people have either 401ks that are contributory by the employer, et cetera. And in those cases, the employers need to make their contributions to the plan that would have been made if the employee had not gone for military duty. But the returning employees, of course, have to pay their part of that retirement. For instance, if it's a contributory 401k and they can give up to 3% for a match, et cetera, the employees need to pay that match, but they have a period 3 times the time that they were gone. For instance, if they were gone for a year, they have 3 years to make up that contribution and put it in the system at the employer. But no longer than 5 years to repay that entire amount in case they're gone for a longer period than a year. And of course, that would be based on the employee's compensation at the rate they would have received if they had not been absent. So special rules for pensions and retirement. Now, healthcare, if it's less than 31 days, you just keep them on the system under the same terms as they have always been with their coverage with the employer. If they're gone more than 30 days, they might elect to continue coverage under what they call COBRA coverage, or something similar to what COBRA coverage is, and HR people are very familiar with that. And they would pay up to 102% of the full premium. And that's common, like I said, with other COBRA-like provisions. But you will find a lot of military people, if they're being activated for a year, they are entitled to TRICARE, and that is the military medical provisions, and a lot of people will go with that. It does cause some hiccups at times because their preferred providers may be different than the ones you had in your company. But in either event, that's their election as to what they want to do. Once they're reemployed, though, they get reinstated in your health plan without any exclusions or waiting periods and that sort of thing. There's also a provision in the law that once they're back in your employ, they can't be discharged except for cause. If they're gone more than 180 days, you can't discharge them for up to a year. If it's a period of 180 days to no more than 30 days, that period of time, if they're gone for that period, they can't be terminated for 180 days. And these, again, says you can discharge them for cause. I would suggest to employers, please make sure that your supervisors that are recommending that discharge don't have the fact that this person was gone for a period of time as one of the reasons that they want to terminate the person. That will not play. What you may want to do as an HR specialist, if you're an executive in the company, make sure your HR people have the right policies in place for your company so that your management team knows what the rules are, and to avoid some of the top mistakes about terminating a person, discrimination, job placement, about insisting that they take vacation time when they don't need to. They get, of course, a military leave without pay while they're gone. And of course, working with them on their work schedules as well. So maybe a thought to just make sure that you feel comfortable that your HR people know the rules and have procedures in place to educate the managers and supervisors of what those rules are. Okay, if there is an issue, and sometimes it does occur, and it's not always evil or malevolent, a lot of times it's just the fact that there may be a misunderstanding of what the law requires, either by the supervisor or perhaps by the soldier as well. So if there is an issue that does come up, the employee / guardsman could contact ESGR for information, excuse me, and if necessary, they could ask for an ombudsman mediator. This is a person that has been trained by ESGR, is a volunteer, they're not getting paid for this, but they would get with the soldier, they would get with the employer, they try to hear both sides of the story of why they think there's an issue and why the employer thinks they've done it correctly. And they will see if they can mediate the complaint. We typically have about a 70 to 80% resolution rate. So a lot of times we're able to very informally get a resolution to the issue without people having to run off to the Department of Labor and have a formal investigation started. And that is an option for the employee, or for them getting a private attorney at their personal expense and filing a lawsuit. So they have all those options, but we recommend to the service member, let's try the ombudsman route first and see if we can get it resolved without a lot of grief and pain. And no offense, lawyers. Employers, you may contact that same ESGR number and they can provide you information. So if you've got a situation you're not sure on how to handle, you could call them up and they'll help assist you in understanding what the law requires for your situation. One other thing that you can do, and this is not well known maybe in the employer community, is if you have someone that is getting activated or deployed or has some training that's going to go on for a period of time, and it's critically, and I'm using the term purposefully, critically important that that person not be gone during that period, you could, and you're entitled to call the military commander for that service member regarding that service and let them know your situation at work and see if there's any way someone else can maybe be sent on that deployment. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen a lot of times, but occasionally there may be another volunteer that might be willing to do it. And perhaps this person could take a deployment at a different time. If you make that call, remember this, that the ultimate decision on whether to release or not call that person up for that duty is solely the military commanders. So this just provides you an opportunity to explain what your situation is and see if there's any relief that the commander can give you or not. And that's not a foul. That's certainly within your rights to do that. And of course, we talk about duration of service. If you have some concern because the person has been gone longer than they first said, you could call the commander and find out what's happening as well. So one other pitch I'll make is hiring Guard and Reserve has a lot of benefits. I know there are some sacrifices that employers make, and that's part of our motto, we all serve. By you're doing that, you're helping serve our national security by doing your part to ensure that we have a vibrant, active volunteer service, and that these folks are not only join us, but also are retained by us so that they can serve for a career in the reserves. There are, of course, obligations that you have, but think what you get. These folks have gone through extensive training. They're very disciplined. They know about teamwork and loyalty as being part of a military team. And I think for all these reasons, they do make good employees. And if you're interested in hiring either veterans or in particular Guard or Reserve folks, I'll have a number on the next page for a guy named John Nelson who can get you in touch with someone in the National Guard that can tell you perhaps about some ways that you could hire veterans and reservists as well. So in closing, if you have any, if you, especially a large company and you want us to come out and do a briefing on the USERRA law and ESGR, we're glad to do it. And of course, we communicate with Guard and Reserve folks. We try to hit every armory, every reserve component member on their drills to let them know about the law and their responsibilities as well. So that's part of what we do as well. We encourage you to participate in our statement of support program, where we'll come out to your business and you can sign a nice statement that you can frame and put on your wall. And of course, work with our ombudsman if you have an issue. They're not getting paid, and their whole goal is to try to see if we can get to yes for both sides. And finally, and we have several in our committee, people that have joined us as a volunteer who are managers in various employers. I'll give you an example. The area chair for Knoxville for a number of years was a Lowe's store manager. A lot of responsibility, but she was a prior Army soldier and felt she wanted to give back. So she is still with our committee, helping me with some of our awards mission as well. So we'd love to have you as a volunteer. In some of your large organizations, you have what's called affinity groups or employer resource groups that include veterans. And we're more than glad to work with them in trying to help the company learn more about USERRA and also look at ways that we can recognize great employers, and they can help a lot. So finally, if you have any questions, you can contact me through John Nelson. He's the one paid person. We have one paid person in each state to help with the administrative details of our mission. If you'll call John Nelson at that number, 615-603-8601, he can get you in touch with me or Steve Martin, and we can help you out with these things. If you want to go on a boss lift, we can make sure you get on our waiting list for that. Or like I said, if you want us to come out to the company, we'd be glad to do it too. So again, thanks so much for your time, and thanks again to the Knoxville Chamber for permitting us this opportunity to talk with you a little bit about USERRA and ESGR, and have a great week. See you.
Thank you both so much. I hope everyone learned something today. I know I did. All their contact information, again, is on the screen. And if the chamber can be of any assistance to you, please let us know. Thank you.